Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the threats which Sunak and the Conservative Party face if they are to try and hold on for another year or so before holding their general election. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, with Tory MPs in complete shock over what was for them very surprising by-election results yesterday, put it this way, I don't think too many Tory MPs bet on Labour winning both those seats. That's why they didn't have Chinese yesterday like I did. But there is increased talk of the general election now being left until the last possible moment. That would be January 2025. It is entirely possible that they will just bumble along now and end up with an election in January 2025. But what if the Conservative Party can't maintain itself for that long? I raised the notion of catastrophic instability in the first video today, but what are all the threats to Sunak, or at least the major ones, to Sunak and the Tory party stability, which could trigger an election earlier than they would ordinarily like? Well, one major threat on the horizon is from the so-called tax pledge. Dozens of Tory MPs, including Liz Truss and Priti Patel, have signed a pledge claiming that they will vote against the budget if it doesn't meet their requirements on taxation. Now, there doesn't seem to be any consistent detail on what these requirements are, but it would appear that lots of Tory MPs are saying that they would vote against any budget which raises the overall rate of tax. Well, the next budget will almost certainly raise the overall rate of tax, even if it is just with stealth taxes. So that would imply that Sunak and Hunt will not be able to get their budget passed next March. Now, if that happens, their government cannot survive much longer, and a May general election is the most likely result. However, it's not clear what this tax pledge group really want. Rishi Sunak has announced that he's considering cutting taxes for the rich, specifically a tax cut for the 5 million highest earners and a cut to stamp duty. Now, it's another fairly obvious show of just who the Tories answer to when their response to a beating in by-elections is not something which will win over the ordinary voters who abandoned them this week, but the wealthy who act as the paymasters for his rebellious MPs. Of course, I'm sure the fact that Sunak will personally benefit from these tax cuts won't have entered his mind at all. But it may be that Sunak knows that Truss, Patel and the other backbenchers who signed the somewhat vague tax pledge do not actually care about the overall rate of tax in the country, but the rate of tax for the wealthy that they shill for. It's also the case that thanks to mainstream media misreporting, ordinary people often think that they are subject to taxes that they're really not. You know, the media often give the impression to people that they're richer than they really are. We recently had the situation whereby polling showed that more people think they'd be affected by inheritance tax than actually are. The same may apply here. The main reason for proposing these tax cuts may well be for Sunak's personal gain and to avoid a rebellion against the budget next year, but with a secondary benefit of conning enough voters into thinking it will help them, either directly or via the long discredited trickle-down economics that some vote Tory to get. Another potential source of instability is Tory MPs making a mistake of electoral strategy. What is fascinating me at the moment are the parallels between the way the media and the Tories are behaving now compared with in 1996, the year before Labour swept to victory. In 1996, as Labour were also winning by-elections with huge swings towards them from the Tories, Tory MPs and the media alike would say things like, oh, but Labour didn't actually get that many votes when you look at it and Tory voters just stayed at home. They'll be back for the general election. Or, well, the people don't really have that much affection for Tony Blair. Or, if only we do this thing that my faction really wants, then it'll all work out. Does that sound familiar? The behaviour of the Tories and Tory client media is a carbon copy of the behaviour of their forebears 27 years ago. And yet the Tories seem to have absolutely no idea that they are thinking and saying exactly what their predecessors thought and said just before that landslide Labour win. They are completely ignorant about what's going on, even though it all happened just a few decades ago. And this complete ignorance, this failure to learn the lessons of history, could lead them to make a serious mistake. They may see that Sunak began his premiership with decent approval ratings and that they have slowly sunk over the last year to the point whereby they are now well below those of both Starmer specifically and the Labour Party generally. This is not election winning territory. They may imagine that risking another leadership contest would mean that the public give the benefit of the doubt to the new leader in the same way as they did to Sunak, and then call an election before the new leader has time to mess things up. They may think that the lesson to learn is that they waited too long with Sunak, that they should have gone to the polls much more quickly. It may even be that enough MPs exist who don't even think it matters who that next leader is, as long as it's a new one, not a repeat like Liz Truss. And although it would take half of the parliamentary party to oust him, it only takes 53 to kickstart the process. If 53 put confidence letters in, there will be a confidence vote. If Sunak wins by an unconvincing margin, his authority is shot, and it's then just a matter of time before he is brought down. It may well be that Sunak is given one last chance to make some progress in the polls. The Wellingborough by-election, which will be triggered with the suspension of Peter Bone, we just don't know exactly when, that will be a good marker. It is sitting on a large enough majority that Sunak can start to give Conservative voters a reason to turn out, and if he does, he can win the by-election. If Labour take it, however, that will be a very clear sign that Sunak is not giving Conservative voters, even in the new year, a reason to vote for him. It will then have been 5 by-elections in very different areas that Labour will have taken with a large, roughly 20-point swing, 4 of whom against the Conservatives. If there are enough Tory MPs out there willing to think about a change of leader to trigger a confidence vote, surely losing that next by-election to a large swing in Labour's favour would be as good a time as any to start the process, because they could get the new leader in, a few months later, call the general election. Third source of promise for Sunak will be the COVID inquiry. Now, there are a lot of very damaging revelations coming out concerning the decision-making of Boris Johnson, but he is well out of the frame now. But there is evidence emerging that Sunak, or Dr. Death as we must now call him, was personally responsible for excess deaths as well from his time as Chancellor. Right now, the reporting is fairly minimal because the mainstream media has got lots of other things to report on. But if the world stops going mad for just a month or two, then there's every chance that people will start to learn about Sunak's responsibility for unnecessary deaths, whether through his Eat Out to Help Out scheme or simply refusing to fund inexpensive yet effective mitigations such as filters in classrooms. As for the VIP lane, that is getting a lot of scrutiny at the inquiry as well, and Sunak is as responsible for that as any senior Tory of the time. The reason Sunak began with such high approval ratings amongst the public was because he was associated with the very few positives of government action during the pandemic, most especially the furlough scheme. What's happened since is that voters have viewed him as a less successful Prime Minister than Chancellor, so his approval rating has fallen. But what happens if they have to revise their opinion of his time as Chancellor as well? As bad as his polling is now, it can still get worse. If more of the public start to learn of what's been revealed at the COVID inquiry related to Sunak personally, and Labour will surely push that, then he could suffer a catastrophic collapse in approval ratings. If his approval ratings ever drop below those of his party, then replacing the leader might then become a more serious consideration by Tory MPs. But there may well be many others who see changing their leader for a third time to be a special sort of madness. And if this happens, they might urge Sunak to call an early election rather than let the party descend into more bitter infighting, only to see an even worse leader take over when the dust settles. Remember, Sunak alone can make the decision to call an election whenever he likes. So those are what I think are the 3 major risks to the stability of the Tory party, which could prevent them waiting until after summer, say, for an election, even if that is what they currently intend. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.